The air currently had that brittleness to it, the kind that you really only get when fall is past its peak and winter's waiting around the corner. Clay and I had been on the ranch since sunup, checking troughs, tightening wire, hauling scrap out of the pastures before snow turned it all into hidden hazards. That was the job this time of year though, tidy the edges, put things in order, make sure nothing came back to bite you when the ground froze and the herds got mean. The cattle weren't where they should have been. They drifted to the south side, bunched together, leaving the northern pasture strangely empty. Animals seem to know things before men do, and I took their absence as some kind of sign, though I didn't say it out loud. Clay seemed to notice it too. He made a joke about it, something about lazy cows, but I caught the way his eyes kept flicking to the end of the property line, where the cottonwood stood gray against the sky. We'd been told to leave that edge alone. Old man Mathers, who owned the spread, was really clear about it. Fix what needs fixing, but don't go looking for work where it don't call to you, he'd said, with that kind of weight too. Neither of us asked any questions. You don't when the man's signing your checks and prefers a quiet room. But work has this weird way of pulling you towards trouble sometimes. A section of the fence was down, wire sagging into the dirt, posts leaning over from the rod. We could have left it for another day, sure, but the light was thinning, and both of us knew an open fence line was a risk that we couldn't really afford. Coyotes, strays, anything could slip through. So we rode out on the north boundary, tools in the bed of the truck, trailing dust behind us. I remember the moment thinking something felt weird, like crossing over into sacred ground, but I told myself it's just the season, the cold, the shadows of dawn. Still, that feeling in my gut had the truth nailed down already before I even knew it. By the time we reached the far edge, the sky was beginning its slow collapse into dusk. Clay cut the engine, and for a few seconds, nobody moved. I took stock the way I always do, listening, measuring, noting what stood out. Out here, the silence was loud. No birds, no crickets, no cough of cattle, just wind in the brush. We stepped down and walked the fence line, boots crunching over the frost-hardened weeds. The wire had snapped clean at one post, leaving a gap wide enough for almost anything short of a bull to wander through. Clay muttered about how long it would take to set new posts, and I was only half listening. My attention was locked on a smell. It wasn't manure or brush fire or anything you'd normally associate with ranch work. This was coppery, rank, decay sitting heavy in the back of my throat. I followed it. 20 feet into the grass, I found the cow. She wasn't one of ours though. The brand mark was unfamiliar, burned deep into her hide, half hidden beneath the tearing. She'd been mauled. Ribs were split apart, belly torn open, tongue lolling off gray and stiff. Coyotes had done some of the work, but not all of it. I crouched close enough to see the edges of the wounds, jagged but not clean. I made a note about the drag marks heading further off into the brush as well. Jesus Christ, Clay said behind me, pulling his bandana up over his nose. That ain't ours, is it? No, I answered back. The brand's from over by Gunnison's place, I think, a couple of miles out. We stood over her for a minute, neither of us really eager to admit what it meant. A dead cow wasn't unusual, but one mauled this close to the line with no signs of a predator lingering set me on edge. Animals don't take cattle down this way unless they're desperate or unless something else is in play. Free-range cows are meaner than hell, and they don't really make for an easy kill. Clay said we should just patch up the fence and go, leave the carcass for the scavengers. I almost agreed with him, and then I saw the boot. It jutted out of the brush like earth had spit it up. Leather cracked and I froze. Clay followed my stare. We didn't speak. You don't really when you see something like that. I grabbed hold and pulled up. The ground gave up its secret slowly. First, the leg, stiff and heavy, then the rest. A body, half buried in leaf litter, chewed in places the way the cow had been. The face was gone, stripped down to bone, hands curled tight, frozen in this clawing gesture. He'd fought to the very end. Clay cursed again and turned away like he might vomit. I continued to look. My habit is to take in the details even when I don't want to. The clothes were ranch clothes, denim, wool, boots worn thin from saddle work. He wasn't carrying a wallet, or if he had, the scavengers had taken it. No obvious marks of identification, just another working man, cut down and left where nobody could find him. A sharp sound then broke the moment. I spun, a hand on the knife in my belt. Out from the tree line, a horse stood there, watching us. She was in rough shape, coat dulled, ribs showing, mane tangled up into knots. Still saddled, stirrups hanging loose. The reins were trailing in the dirt. She looked ready to bolt, but too tired to commit to it. Her eyes were rolling white in that low light. Clay breathed out shaky, collecting himself. "That's his, right? It has to be," he said, nodding at the corpse, then at the horse. His hand came to rest on the revolver on his waist. I mean, it made sense. A cow strays through a broken fence, a hired hand saddles up to fetch it. Somewhere along the line, everything goes wrong. The cow ends up gutted, the rider ends up dead, the horse wanders until hunger and exhaustion drag her back. That was the story the scene wanted us to believe, and boy, was it believable. We circled slowly, careful to not spook the animal. I kept my hands low, talking softly. Eventually, she let me grab the reins. The leather was cracked and stiff. I checked the saddle for marks, a brand, stamp, tag, but nothing. Whoever owned her had made no mark. Honestly, we probably should have left it at that. Should have taken the horse and the corpse back to Mathers, called it in. Let the sheriff sort out all these details, but something continued to gnaw at me. I personally wanted confirmation, needed it even. So I told Clay that we had to go back to the body. He didn't really seem to like the idea, but he followed me. We stood over the dead man again, both of us swallowing against the stench, the buzzing flies that clung to him even in the cold. I crouched down and examined the wounds more closely. The teeth marks were obvious, but they weren't the only marks. I pushed aside the torn jacket, holes, small, round, and ragged at the edges. Not made by claws or tusks, but definitely bullet holes. Clear as day. They ran through the chest, peppered up the ribs. I counted 3. Then I looked at his skull, or what was left of it. The top was gone, shattered clean through. I didn't really need to be a coroner to recognize the truth. "Yeah, this wasn't animals," I said. Clay blinked at me, then looked closer for himself. His face drained white. "Jesus, is that a bullet hole in his head?" "He was shot, then left out here. Coyotes just cleaned up what was left," I surmised. We found ourselves standing there in silence once more, the weight of it all choking any more discussion. The questions started stacking up in my head. Who was he? Why would somebody kill him out here, in the scrub at the edge of Mathers land? Why leave the horse saddled, wandering around? Clay was the first to break the silence. "We need to go," he said, and he actually sounded kind of scared. I agreed. This wasn't just a dead hand and a stray cow anymore. This was straight up murder. And murder has a way of spreading, if you know what I mean. We hauled the horse along, neither of us talking now. The fence remained broken, wires sagging, tools untouched from where we dropped them off. The work didn't really matter anymore. What matters was getting back before somebody saw us out here and maybe shot us too. The wind picked up behind us as we walked, carrying with it the rustle of brush, the shifting of shadows. I kept my eyes moving, checking the tree line, the ground, the space behind us. Once you find a body riddled with bullets, you can't help but wonder if the shooter is still nearby, watching his work, waiting to see if somebody can find it. By the time we reached the truck, my nerves were shot. Clay got the horse loaded, as we just happened to have space in the horse trailer, while I continued to scan the horizon. The land around us was quiet and still. We drove back without really speaking, and finally, the ranch house lights came into view, warm and steady, but they didn't feel like safety, not with the knowledge that we now carried. We called it in as soon as we made it back to the house. Mathers didn't ask questions, just dialed the sheriff with that flat tone of his. Clay and I sat on the porch, watching the horse pace circles around the hitching post, feeling restless. Her eyes seemed to roll back every time the wind shifted. She didn't want to be here any more than we did. The deputies arrived just before sundown. They wanted us to lead them back out there, walk them straight to the body, the cow, the fence. So we did. It felt different now, going back. The land had now turned mean in the dark. Every tree bent like it wanted to fall on us. The body was still there, exactly where we left it, but something about him seemed smaller now, almost like he'd sunk deeper into the earth, half swallowed in just a handful of hours. The deputies said very little. They took photos, collected casings, though I never saw them bag anything. One deputy had checked the horse back at the house, running his hands down her legs, checking the teeth. "She's been out here a lot longer than a day," he muttered. "Closer to a week, I'd say." That didn't sit right. A week alone, saddled and trailing reins, and nobody had noticed her until now? We thought we saw everything out there. We gave our statements and left nothing out. Still, when I looked in their faces, I could tell they were already burying it in paperwork. "Some kind of accidental shooting," one said later. "Even though I don't know how you explain to put 3 rounds in a man's chest and then 1 through his skull by accident. Probably some drunks pot shooting in the brush, and this unlucky fellow was standing there, taking a leak or something." The investigation stretched on through November. A few strangers came and went, state men, not locals. They brought clipboards, asked pretty much the same questions, circled around the horse like they held some kind of key. At one point, they shaved her mane down to the skin, looking for marks. Clay swore that he saw a scar under the hair, a brand that had been burned over to erase it. They wouldn't let us close enough to confirm, though. Then there was the matter of the boots. The coroner swore the tread pattern didn't match anything sold locally, not in the country, maybe not in the state. "Imported," he said. "Military issue or foreign exchange." Some of the details were really weird to me, but what do I know? After I started keeping a notebook, dates, details, odd scraps in the investigators that they clearly ignored, like the .223 shell that we found near the fence post 3 days after they supposedly combed the area, or the way the dead cow's brand didn't line up with any registered inside county records. Close but off, almost like it had been imitated. Clay told me I should burn the notebook, forget it, but I continued to write. By December, the case was cold. The official word was a trespassing drifter, cause unknown. The horse went unclaimed and sold at auction. I still can't shake what I saw. A body shot to pieces, boots that didn't belong, a horse half starved, and a cow that shouldn't have been there at all. It was like some kind of bad airport novel. Occasionally, sometimes when I ride out to that far fence line, I swear the air still carries that same copper tang. The cattle won't even graze there. Clay won't drive past it. I keep my notes, but not holding my breath. The road narrowed to little more than a cracked ribbon laid across the countryside. The map had promised this scenic drive, best leaf color this side of the country. But it was more isolation than really anything else. Acres of oaks and maples pressed in closely, their leaves showing off in this fire red, orange, and gold, while the blacktop wound us deeper into nowhere. "You're obsessed," my boyfriend said, smirking at me from the driver's seat. "All this for a photo shoot. We could have stayed in town taking pictures in front of the coffee shop pumpkins or something." I shot him a look. "Pumpkins don't count. This is about color, about the change. You'll see, the light hits just right out here." He shook his head, amused, but I saw the corners of his mouth twitching like he was holding back something sweeter than sarcasm. That was him though, half teasing, half there just because he liked being around me. The windows were down, the air was cool enough to nip at my cheeks, carrying that sharp smell of wet leaves and faint musk of river water. I snapped a few pictures out the passenger window while he drove, barns fading behind us, power lines disappearing. When the road dropped us at this river crossing, I knew this was the spot. An old bridge, paint peeled to rust, spanning the water. The current below us was running hard, white caps breaking against the boulders midstream. I leaned forward in my seat. "Stop here." He eased the car into the shoulder. We got out and I felt the air grow colder near the water. The sun was dipping behind a cloud cover, draining the warmth. "Perfect," I said, lifting my phone. I framed the shot, trees reflecting the racing water, sky darkening, branches stretching out like veins. "Hold on, I'll get closer." He vaulted the guardrail before I could protest, his shoes scraping up against the rocks as he picked his way down the bank. "Careful," I called out. He grinned back up at me, cocky as always. "Relax, babe, I'm fine." I lowered the phone, heart ticking a little faster. "Seriously, it's slick down there. Just stay where you are." He waved me off, stepping onto this mossy rock that was jutting into the water. He was aiming for an angle shot, a dramatic one, the one that would blow all my pictures out of the water. He crouched, phone in hand, adjusting. Then came the sound of a sharp crack of wood giving way. His foot slid, his arms pinwheeled, and before I could scream, he was gone, splashed hard into the river. I screamed out for him. He bobbed up, coughing, arms flailing as the current grabbed him like a toy. He tried to fight, tried to angle back toward the bank, but the water was going really fast. I sprinted over to the guardrail, clutching the cold steel, eyes locked on his head as it spun downstream. I yelled out, telling him to hold on. But he was already being pulled away, dragged under the bridge, vanishing around the bend. I vaulted the guardrail and slid down the bank, knees buckling on that wet slope. Dead leaves and roots tore underneath my hands. The ground tilted toward the water so steeply, it felt like gravity had a personal grudge against me. "Babe!" I shouted, though the river was swallowing my words. The water was roaring loud down here, rushing over the rocks around the bends, carrying him further and further. I stumbled along the bank, crashing through the brush, following the brief flashes of his jacket between the trees before it disappeared. The trail, if you could call it that, was little more than a deer path, branches slapping at my arms, thorns catching in my jeans. My feet slipped on slick moss and wet soil, but I pushed harder, lungs tearing out in that cold air. Every second stretched with the thought of his head going under and not coming back up. Half a mile down, the river slowed into this wide bend, logs jammed together in the shallows, leaves spinning in the eddies. I stumbled out of the trees, scanning and praying. I saw movement at the water's edge. I lurched forward, thinking it was him, but it wasn't. The shape broke from the brush with a snort, squat and heavy, bristled hair slick with mud. It was a wild hog, big, maybe a couple 100 pounds, tusks curving like knives, eyes dark and mean. Another shape behind it, smaller but just as ugly. I froze, my brain still clawing to save him, stuttering to a stop in the sight though. The hog was pawing at the ground, shoulders rolling. It wasn't curious, it was pissed. Then I saw why. Off to the side, half hidden in the brush, lay the torn carcass of a deer. Its ribcage had been open like a bag of chips. The air stank of blood, thick and coppery, riding on the cold river wind. My stomach flipped. The hog's had a kill and it was standing on top of it. The big one squealed and my ears rang. Then it charged me. I turned and bolted, my feet barely even finding any traction in that mud. But the sound of it, hooves pounding, brush snapping, it was right behind me. I pumped my legs harder than they ever had before, lungs searing with fire. I cut left along the bank, branches clawing at my arms again. The hog crashed through it like they weren't even there, and its scream tore in the air closer and closer. I risked a glance back when I saw the flash of tusks. Mud sprang off its legs. Adrenaline spiked hot then, and I screamed. The ground then sloped down into the water. I slid and my feet got tangled, knees cracking into rock. Pain quickly shot up my leg, but I scrambled forward, hands clawing through the mud and the weeds. The hog skidded behind me, spraying earth. I scrambled up this half-rotted log that angled over the water, my hands burning on the rough bark, splinters biting in deep. The hog then rammed the log from below, the impact rattling my bones. I nearly pitched forward into the current myself. It backed up, snorted, and came again, and the log shuddered underneath me. I clung hard though, knuckles white, whispering nonsense prayers to myself, trying not to scream again. Another impact. The log cracked, part of it splintering. My boot slipped, my chest smashed up against the bark. I kicked down blindly, my heel connecting with the snout. It squealed, stumbled back a foot, and that was something, I guess. I shoved myself higher onto that log though, scrambling to the far side. My jeans tore open on a branch. The hog bellowed and circled, mud flying, but I didn't wait for it to come again. I leapt off the log and into the shallow water. The shock of the cold knifed through me. I splashed forward, stumbling, falling to my knees, scrambling back up, anything to put distance between us. The hog gave chase, crashing into the water behind me. Its bulk slowed down just enough for me to reach a cluster of rocks at midstream. I hauled myself up, scraping skin raw on jagged edges. The hog lurked in the shadows, glaring, huffing clouds of steam off into the cold air. It paced and splashed, but didn't climb the rocks. The smaller one had joined it now, squealing, teeth snapping at the air. They guarded their ground, the kill behind them. I stood there shivering, shoes heavy with river water, staring across the bend like I'd woken up in hell. Then a sound cut through the river's roar, coughing. I spun, eyes darting upstream. 50 yards away, tangled up in another mess of driftwood, was him, my boyfriend, half sprawled out on a log, choking up water, dragging himself toward the shallows. Relief tore through me. "I'm here!" I screamed to him. He lifted his head, dazed, confused, but eyes unfocused. I risked one last look at the hogs. They stood right where they were, watching, the big one grunting, ears twitching. Satisfied I was leaving, or maybe just too lazy to press any further. Either way, they didn't follow as I slipped off the rocks and staggered upstream. I half ran, half fell across mud and rock until I finally reached him. He was soaked, shaking, lips pale as paper. His breath was coming rattling out of him, but he was alive. I collapsed onto my knees beside him, grabbing his arm, pulling him up. "Don't you dare," I whispered, though I wasn't even sure what I meant. Don't die or don't scare me like that again, because honestly, he looked like a corpse. He coughed, spat out some water, and then managed to say, I told you you get your shot." It was a half joke, half delirium, but I clutched him and never wanted to let go. I hooked my arm underneath his and pulled, our feet sucking at the mud. He staggered upright, teeth chattering, his weight heavy against me. Every step felt burrowed, like the river could come back and claim him at any second. Behind us came another squeal, though, high and furious. I twisted and the hogs were in fact following. First the smaller one, weaving through the brush, then the bigger. They weren't going to let us slip away so easy, I guess. "Move!" I hissed to him, yanking him forward. We stumbled along the bank, crashing through brittle weeds and thorny undergrowth. My lungs were screaming for air, but fear shoved me a little faster. The hogs continued to tear after us. I could almost feel them at my back, the ground trembling even. One wrong step, one stumble, and they'd be on top of us. The slope ahead led up to the road. I dragged him, half hauling, half shoving, until we clawed over the lip and onto the asphalt again. The car waited 20 yards up, silver hood catching what little light remained. "Go! Go!" My voice cracked. We limped, slipped, and shoved ourselves forward. Behind us, the hog scrambled up the bank, squealing, eyes glinting with rage. The bigger one hit the pavement like a tank. It charged, closing in the distance fast. I fumbled my keys out from my pocket. The car beeped as I slammed the unlock button. I ripped the door open, shoved him inside, and then dove across the seat as that hog continued to thunder closer. That beast rammed the bumper with a bone-shaking crash. The whole car jolted, glass rattling in its frame. I screamed and jammed the locks. The hog then backed up, snorted, and slammed into the side panel, denting the metal with its skull. The smaller one just squealed and circled. Start it! He croaked beside me, but my hands were shaking. It took 2 tries before the engine finally roared to life. I threw it into gear and floored the pedal. The tires screamed, gravel spraying as we lurched forward. The hogs continued to give chase for 20 yards before dropping back. The bigger one planting itself in the middle of the road, watching us vanish away. I didn't slow down until the bridge was at least a mile behind us. He sat slumped in the passenger seat, shivering, eyes hollow. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles were aching. Outside the window, the October woods blurred into streaks of fire-colored leaves. They didn't look beautiful anymore. They almost looked like warning signs that we've been too dumb to read. There isn't a heroic follow-up to this story either. We left with our tails tucked firmly behind us, didn't call the police, game wardens, or even go to the hospital. What could we say or do? That a wild animal scared the shit out of us? There's not really any kind of help for that.